name is Jo Neill. I'm Professor of Psychopharmacology at the University of Manchester, and I am chair of the Medical Psychedelics Working Group for Drug Science. And we are working towards enabling patients to access psychedelic medicine. So I've been a researcher all my life. I'm an early stage animal researcher working in drug discovery for psychiatry. So this is looking for better and new medicines for psychiatric disorders. And the huge pharmaceutical companies pulled out of this area of research at least 15 years ago because it is a very difficult area to work in and because of the lack of success. So we badly need innovation in this area, and we badly need medicines that work for people where traditional approaches do not work. So we are talking about very hard to treat conditions like PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is suffered by combat veterans, by survivors of sexual abuse, probably by people who've survived COVID, who've been alone in a ward without their family, first responders, former, well, police officers, firemen, all those. So this is a common disorder and very, very difficult to treat. Of course, there are ways of treating this disorder and other disorders like treatment-resistant depression. However, there are many people who do not respond to conventional medicine. So I want to be clear that there are lots of people who do respond well to antipsychotics, to psychotherapy, to antidepressants, but there are many people who do not. And there are many difficult to treat disorders in psychiatry: addiction, anorexia. Psychedelic medicine, from the research that's been conducted in the UK and in the States and worldwide now, the last 20 years or so, is showing very powerful healing effects of psychedelic medicines for many of these disorders. So we're thinking about people who've been depressed for 25 years. They have tried every medicine that conventional psychiatry can offer them, all the psychotherapy, and they are no better. And for these disorders, suicide is, they've come to the end of the line, and suicide is very common in these people. Psychedelic medicine, drugs such as psilocybin, has been shown to have extremely promising beneficial effects for these people. And we must enable the research needed to provide this medication in clinical settings for the people who so badly need it. So we are asking government to reschedule psilocybin from Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations to Schedule 2. So it's important to understand how difficult it is to research a drug that is in Schedule 1, and all psychedelics are in Schedule 1. So MDMA, that's ecstasy, psilocybin, LSD, these are all in Schedule 1. Now, the Home Office says, quite rightly, that people like myself, people who work in universities, people who work in drug companies, people who are trying to develop better medicines for these people, can research these medicines. And they're absolutely right. You can apply for a controlled drugs license. But I want to explain that this hinders research. You can get a controlled drugs license, but it is extremely difficult to do so. And there are many laboratories who cannot get such a license. So for somebody like me, who's an animal researcher, it cost me over £3,000. You have to keep the drug in a locked, alarmed cabinet. The person who holds the license has to have a DBS check. Now, we are researchers, we're academics. We handle Schedule 2 drugs, Schedule 2 to 5, I should say, all the time. So my main research is with a molecule very similar to ketamine. Ketamine is Schedule 2. Cocaine and amphetamine, heroin, they're all Schedule 2. We are responsible citizens our aim is to research these drugs to understand how they work in the brain and if they have therapeutic potential. So why we don't understand why we need a special license to research a drug because it has got caught up in drug law. So I talked about the cost. So for me, it cost at least, I would say, £4,000 by the time I'd had all the extra checks and balances. What about if you want to do a clinical trial with psilocybin, for example? And let me be clear, this is psilocybin that is made in the laboratory by chemists. So this is synthesized psilocybin. So we're getting it from a regulated supplier. So James Rucker at King's College London was running the clinical trial on depression. And remember, this is for people who are not responding to any other medication. And this is badly needed evidence we need. He had to get 6 separate controlled drugs licenses to get one molecule or one pill into a patient. So every step along the way had to have its own controlled drugs license. So each one of these costs at least £3,000. He had to have one in the pharmacy where the drug is dispensed, where it is put into capsules, people who make the drug. When he brings it into the clinic, he has to have a license there. So that's at least £20,000 out of his research budget before he's able to start this work. And this is taxpayers' money. So it's not just about the cost, though. There are serious other barriers caused by a drug being in Schedule 1. It's enormously bureaucratic process. So you have to apply for this license. The form is incredibly difficult to fill in. It's very unwieldy. And there are enormous delays. You have to have your laboratory inspected by a Home Office inspector. And it took me a year to get my controlled drugs license. 6 months to a year is the norm. We have been doing a qualitative study, interviewing researchers up and down the country on this, on their experiences with trying to research Schedule 1 drugs. And we have discovered that this is the norm, 6 months to 1 year. And the very worrying thing that we experienced or we found out is that many laboratories with fantastic scientists working in them in our UK universities, this is the life sciences sector, cannot do this research. So they cannot afford the money for a controlled drugs license. They don't have the facilities to hold it. They don't, because for some reason we need alarmed cabinets and so on. So they don't have that research budget, and we talked to quite a few people like this. This is terrible. So this is a big barrier. These are people who should be doing this research. And also, I spoke to one researcher who had some fantastic ideas for what she would like to do with psilocybin to help us understand how it produces its effects in the brain. She couldn't do that because she couldn't wait for a year because her research money would have run out by the time she started this work. So it's very important, I think, that people understand the difficulties caused by having any drug in Schedule 1 for research. So we're only asking for this drug, for psychedelics, to be moved out of Schedule 1 into Schedule 2 to enable us to do the work required to enable this to become a medicine in modern psychiatry, which is, as I've explained, is a very, very badly needed medicine. So the other issue about working with psychedelics is there's an enormous amount of stigma and fear around psychedelics. For some reason, people think they're very dangerous drugs. And in fact, that's absolutely not the case. These are very safe medicines if taken under the right conditions. So again, I'd like to be clear that it's very important that these medicines are taken in the right set and setting, and that people are prepared, because we're talking about high doses of these medicines, and they have very profound effects in the brain and on your psyche and your experience. And that's part of the healing process. But it's very important to be guided through that process, to be prepared for it, and to have integration following the experience to try and make sense of that experience. That's a very important aspect of the therapy. But this is a wonderful medical model, because for many people, they will only need this medicine once, twice, 3 times under medical supervision, and they will be healed. So we're not talking about a drug with the standard medical model where you take a drug every day. You know, we're all used to that. You take a drug for gout, for diabetes, whatever your disorder is. So this is healing, and we need to understand how this process occurs so that we can understand better other disorders. So I'm, you know, as I said, I'm a basic bench scientist. I'm particularly interested in some other effects of psychedelics, such as anti-inflammatory properties. So there's a little bit of research out there, very little, I must say, that these drugs may inhibit the inflammatory process. Now, we know that many disorders are caused by an excess of inflammation. So there are potentially many other disorders that these molecules could treat that we don't know about yet. What about effects on the microbiome? That's another potential therapeutic avenue, disorders like IBS, but we know nothing about that. So yeah, I'm really urging government to help us do this research. Research is very expensive, and to have to spend, you know, £25,000 to get a drug into a patient is prohibitive for most laboratories and most, and you know, it's not enabling research. Another issue is, as scientists, and when we do research, we collaborate and we want to work with other experts. A colleague of mine wanted to work on a controlled drug and under my Schedule 1 license, but he works in a different building to me, works on a different species that is located in a different building. He couldn't do this. He had to get his own controlled drugs license. So he decided not to do it. It was too much for him. When I started, a colleague up the road in another building had a controlled drugs license. I couldn't use their controlled drugs license, even though we were working on the same drug. These things are very frustrating, and it's very hard for us to understand this, and it's not enabling, and it's not scientific. So I'm chair of the Medical Psychedelics Working Group for Drug Science, and Drug Science is a leading independent UK organisation providing evidence-based information about drugs for everybody and enabling patient access. And that is one of the aims of this working group. It's to work with the regulators to enable patients to access this badly needed medicine. We have other aims. We will be educating the new generation of healthcare professionals, and actually existing healthcare professionals, so psychiatrists, pharmacists, nurses, about how these drugs work, psychedelic medicine, and how important it is to integrate this into psychiatry. Of course, we have to first of all reschedule the drug so that we can enable research, and then they will need to be enabled legal as a medicine, just like we've done for medical cannabis. Our other aims are destigmatization, because as I said, there's an awful lot of misinformation about these drugs, and people do not understand the therapeutic benefits, the importance of their medical benefits, and people seem to think that they're dangerous, which is untrue. And we will be producing research. I think the Medical Cannabis Working Group has provided 6 research outputs already. So Anne Schlag is the head of research at Drug Science. She works incredibly hard to produce scientific outputs. So we will be doing that about psychedelic medicine as well. And actually there is a special issue of the Journal of Psychopharmacology, and that is the journal of the British Association for Psychopharmacology that I was president of until quite recently. The best psychopharm organization in the world, everybody. I highly encourage you to join. So that will be on psychedelic medicine in a year or so. So before I finish, I would like to reiterate the importance of rescheduling to enable research up and down this country. And as I said, there are many people who cannot do this research because of the barriers, the Schedule 1 barriers. And the importance of developing new medicines for people who badly need them. So I spoke with a combat veteran who had done his own research, and he knew that the standard treatments would not work for him. He had very bad PTSD. He took himself to Holland. He bought truffles, so magic mushrooms, psilocybin is the active ingredient and legal in Holland. Sat in a hotel room with his girlfriend and took 2 doses, high doses, and had a psychedelic experience pretty much on his own, without any psychotherapy, without any medical supervision, without any hope of integration afterwards to make sense of his experience. But the amazing thing is he came out cured. And that was 18 months ago, and he is still well. Now that is a wonderful story that so that is healing. He healed himself. And I'm doing some qualitative research at the university, interviewing combat veterans about their use of psychedelics for trauma. And we've heard the same story. What is shameful about this is that he had to go out of this country. This is a chap who had fought for us to keep us safe, risked his life every day, had to go out of this country to access the medicine that he so desperately needed to heal himself. And that is absolutely shameful. And we must change things. So thank you very much for listening.